Welcome to Celpip Accelerate. Let's take a quick tour of this course to show you how to access all that it has to offer. If you first opened Celpip Accelerate on a computer, you likely noticed a number of tabs on your left, one for each topic of the course. Selecting any of these will open a drop-down menu listing all the activities related to that topic. These include videos, online quizzes, and a host of downloadable content, such as test format charts, note-taking templates, and transcripts. If you are using Celpip Accelerate on a mobile device, the menus will look slightly different, but the content is exactly the same. Right above the menus on the left, you'll notice two additional tabs. Selecting Achievements and Progress will show you your overall completion of the course, and selecting Chapters will take you back to the menus for each topic. If watching a video on a computer, you'll notice a Settings button in the bottom right corner of the screen. Selecting this will allow you to alter the video's speed. For example, if you click on Speed, you'll have options to slow down or speed up the video. You can try playing with these settings right now if you like. And finally, at the very bottom of the menus on the left, you'll notice a survey option. Please feel free to fill this out once you have finished the course. So here's what you need to know about the reading test. You'll have one unscored practice task at the beginning, and then you'll be scored on 4 different parts. You may see additional items as well. What? Don't worry. These additional items are unscored, and they're only for research and development purposes. Altogether, the test will take you around an hour. So what should you know about the reading test? Well, there's plenty to discuss to help you prepare, but we'll get to the specifics in later videos. For now, I'd just like to touch on some overall points that each reading part has in common. First, every reading part will display the text on one side of the screen and all the questions on the other side. This way, you can easily refer back and forth when you're answering the questions for each part. All the test questions in the reading passages are in the same format, multiple choice in a drop-down menu. Every part in the reading test also has a Next button. This button is there so that you can skip to the next part before the time is up. You don't have to click Next to move forward in the test. When your time is up, the test will automatically move to the next part. Don't be too quick to click Next once you finish a reading part. Once you do that, you can't go back, and you won't be able to carry over the extra time. So the only benefit to clicking Next before your time is up is that your reading test will end a bit sooner. If you have any time left over after answering a question, you might want to use it to check over your answer. And, lastly, you'll be given notepaper and a pen during the test. You don't have to use them, but making notes, especially during the tougher reading parts, might really help. This was just a brief overview of the reading test. If you'd like to get more familiar with the format, scoring, and types of questions on the test, why not try out our 2 online sample tests? They're free, so why not? You can also purchase some online practice tests. In addition to completely different questions in each of these tests, they also give you sample responses from writing and speaking from real test takers at different Celpip levels. And of course, you'll learn about the reading test in much more detail throughout the rest of Celpip Accelerate. Over the next 7 videos, we're going to talk about some key strategies to help you perform at your best on the reading test. First, we'll cover the different question types you'll see on the test, and some strategies on how to approach each type. Then we'll discuss some unique strategies you can use for each of the 4 reading parts. In the last 2 videos, we'll talk about how to deal with difficult questions on the reading test. In this video, we're going to talk about the types of questions on the reading test and how best to approach each type. Every question on the test is multiple choice with 4 options. We can group these questions into 3 categories: general meaning, specific information, and inference. Let's talk about general meaning questions first. What I mean by this is that some questions on the reading test ask about the main ideas of what you've just read. For these types of big picture questions, think about each reading passage as a whole. What was it mainly about? What was being discussed? Skimming is a key skill to help you answer this type of question. When you skim a passage, you read over it very quickly, keeping an eye out for the main ideas. Let's try an example. Here is a shortened passage from reading part 1. I'll give you 10 seconds to read it. Remember, you don't have to read every word. You're just trying to get the general idea. Of course, if you need more time, you can pause the video. Ready? Okay, here we go. Okay, now here's a general meaning question about this text. Why is Teresa contacting Alexa? She'd like to meet for lunch. She'd like to take her class to the library. She'd like to volunteer at the library on weekends. Or she'd like to return some overdue books. This question is dealing with the main idea of the email, not any one specific part. Throughout the message, what is Teresa talking about? She's asking her acquaintance, Alexa, if she could bring her class to the library. Therefore, B, she'd like to take her class to the library, is the correct answer. Now let's talk about questions dealing with specific information. These are basically the opposite of general meaning questions. Specific information doesn't apply to the overall situation, but rather to specific points. This is where keywords come into play. You know that skimming is a handy skill for general meaning questions. Now I'm going to talk about scanning. When you scan the text, you look for keywords and specific pieces of information. Now here's an example of a specific information question about the passage you just read. What does Teresa want her students to do at the library? Learn about places in the world? Meet a well-known travel writer? Practice searching the internet? Or read books in other languages? So if you were to scan the text for this answer, you try to look for words and ideas related to what the students are doing at the library. You might recall that partway through the passage, Teresa mentions, "I'd like my grade 9 students to look at the map collection and the atlases. They should learn to locate countries on a map and identify their capital cities." In other words, she would like her students to learn about places in the world. Therefore, A is the correct answer. As you can see, the answer to this question was found in a particular part of the passage, rather than being based on a general understanding of the text. Therefore, it's a question about specific information. Now onto the last type of question, inference. When you make an inference, you draw conclusions based on what you read, using information you learned from the passage. For these questions, the answer will not be mentioned directly in the passage. You've got to be able to make reasonable and logical assumptions about the situation. To show you what I mean, let's look at one more question from the text. What is likely true about Teresa's students? They are keen to learn about world travel. They come from a variety of cultural backgrounds. They have never visited a library before. Or they are mostly well-behaved. The text does not explicitly state the cultural background of Teresa's students. However, it does mention that in addition to English, her students know either French or Mandarin, which leads us to make the reasonable assumption that their families are from French or Mandarin-speaking regions of the world, and that therefore the class is culturally diverse, or made up of a variety of cultural backgrounds. Therefore, B is the correct answer. So this time, the answer isn't clearly stated in any one place in the passage, nor is it an overall idea. But we can figure it out by making an educated guess, or an inference. One last thing about general meaning, specific information, and inference questions. We've been using a shortened version of reading part 1 as an example, but you should keep in mind that these types of questions will appear in all parts of the reading test. And on the official test, you won't know which questions belong to which categories, so being aware of the categories beforehand can really make you more prepared. In the following 4 videos, we'll discuss some unique strategies for each part of the reading test. In the previous video, we discussed the different types of questions you'll see on the reading test, as well as some strategies for each type. In the following 4 videos, we'll touch on some specific strategies for each reading part. In this video, we'll talk about reading part 1. Okay, in reading part 1, reading correspondence, where should you begin? Well, before even starting to read anything, you should quickly preview the entire part. Let's use an example to show you what I mean. First, there will always be a timer like this at the top of the screen. So I've got 11 minutes for this part. And how about the number of questions? Well, I've got 6 questions about the main passage, and then I've got another 5 questions where I've got to fill in the blanks in a response paragraph. So I've got a total of 11 minutes for 11 questions. But if I spend around a minute on each question, that doesn't leave me much time to actually read the passage. Uh-oh. Don't worry. I briefly mentioned the concepts of skimming and scanning in a previous video. Now I'm going to show you how useful these both can be. You may not have enough time to thoroughly read every line of the message, as well as answer the questions. Skimming will help you use your time more efficiently. When you skim a passage of text, you read over it very quickly, keeping an eye out for the main ideas. Let's do that here. Remember that the main passage in reading part 1 is an email message, so there will always be a sender and a recipient. I can immediately see that the author of the message is Teresa, and she's writing to Alexa. Next up, what is the message about? Maybe I can figure this out by skimming the first sentence or 2 of each paragraph. This is often enough to indicate the main idea of the passage. Okay, let's see. In the first paragraph, Teresa is recalling how she and Alexa met at an event at Teresa's school. This paragraph is pretty short, but we can also tell that Teresa wishes to take her class to the local library. So Teresa's a teacher. So maybe Alexa is a librarian. In the second paragraph, we learn about Teresa's opinion that students are too reliant on the internet for doing research. In the third paragraph, we learn that Teresa wants her students to look at maps and atlases at the library. Next, we find out that Teresa appreciates the resources at the library. In the last paragraph, it looks like Teresa is trying to schedule a time for her class to visit the library. Since she's asking Alexa about this, Alexa is probably a librarian there. Okay, great. So just by skimming the text, I've got a general idea of what this passage is about. Now let's try a question from the first section. Why does Teresa want to avoid the computers? The geography websites are out of date. Her students will laugh at her computer skills. The online games will waste her students' time. Or, she wants her students to focus on print materials. Okay, back to the passage. But where should I look for the answer? Well, I know that in the second paragraph, Teresa talks about how students use the internet too much. Since they'd need computers to do so, the answer could be in this paragraph. Now that I know where I should specifically be looking, I'll scan for the answer. Scanning is when you look for keywords and specific pieces of information in the text. This whole paragraph talks about how students use the internet too much during their research. And one sentence even states, I would prefer that the tour minimize computer resources. The first sentence of the following paragraph also mentions how Teresa wants her students to look at the map collection and the atlases, which are types of print books. Therefore, we can tell that D, she wants her students to focus on print materials, is the correct answer. Okay, now let's look at the second section of questions. Remember that in reading part 1, the final 5 questions will always be in the form of a response to the first message. By quickly skimming this response, I can confirm that this is the case. Alexa is responding to Teresa's email. I've got to fill in the blank for each question in order to complete the message. And remember that when you write an email in response to someone, your email is usually sequential. In other words, you typically follow the form of the first email and respond to the other person's comments in the same order in which they wrote them. The same goes for this response. So here, the first paragraph of Alexa's response basically corresponds to the first couple of paragraphs of Teresa's message. Let's look at the first question for this section. I remember giving you a tour, meeting you, helping your class, or talking to your colleagues, and look forward to giving your students a tour. So you probably remembered that as we skimmed Teresa's message, the first paragraph told us how she and Alexa had met at Teresa's school during a meetup event. Therefore, B, meeting you, correctly completes this sentence. In this video, we discussed a number of strategies that can prove very useful for reading part 1. Regardless of the topic of this part, there are some things that will always be the same. The time will be 11 minutes, you'll have 11 questions to answer, and the text will take the form of an email and a response. And remember that skimming and scanning can help you efficiently answer each question within the time limit. In the next video, we'll discuss some specific strategies for reading part 2, reading to apply a diagram. Is responding will always be the same. The time will be 11 minutes. You'll have 11 of an email to help you discuss some specific strategies for reading part 2, reading to apply a In the previous video, we discussed some special strategies for reading part 1. In this video, we're going to talk about some strategies that will help you in part 2 of the reading test. Okay, in reading part 2, reading to apply a diagram, where should you begin? This one is unique among the reading parts. On the left side of the screen, you won't have any message or article to read. Instead, you'll have a diagram. You'll have to approach this a little differently. But before we discuss that any further, what's the first thing you should do when you start reading part 2? Quickly preview the entire part. Here's an example to show you what I mean. First, there will always be a timer like this at the top of the screen. So I've got 9 minutes for this part. And how about the number of questions? Well, I've got 5 questions where I've got to fill in blanks in an email that corresponds to the diagram on the left. And then I've got another 3 questions about the text as a whole. So I've got a total of 9 minutes for 8 questions. But if I spend just over a minute on each question, that doesn't leave me much time to actually do any reading. Don't panic. As I mentioned earlier, you can approach this part a little differently, and you won't need to actually read the entire diagram. In fact, doing so might be a little tricky. Instead, let's focus on skimming. When you skim a passage of text, you read over it very quickly, keeping an eye out for the main ideas. Let's try to skim over the diagram. Remember that each diagram in reading part 2 will look a little different. Sometimes it may appear as a brochure, or a menu, or even a web page. In this case, it's basically a set of instructions. But regardless of how it's presented, you should start by skimming the top of the graphic. This typically gives you some general information. Here, I can see that this diagram is a set of food safety policies for some staff. So they probably work in a restaurant. Headings are also a great way of skimming for main ideas. In this case, I can see that the headings are about food temperature, food handling, food preparation, and hand washing. Each heading also has a number of smaller points that follow it. I can also quickly skim the email on the right. Remember that this email always references the diagram. In this example, I can tell that Dave is writing this email to Jennifer. So who are these people? Maybe I can find out. Now I'll look at the first sentence or two in each paragraph. First, Dave is thanking Jennifer for putting together the poster on policies. Aha! So Jennifer must have been the person who created the diagram. In the second paragraph, Dave is suggesting to reinforce the policy about hand washing. Okay, so from the context of this message, I can surmise that Jennifer and Dave are probably co-workers at this business. Alright, so just by quickly skimming the diagram and message, I've got a general idea of what this part is about. Now let's try a question from the first section. This is from the end of the first paragraph. In fact, I noticed just today someone leaving ice cream on the counter. This is a clear violation of the first, second, third, or fourth policy. Alright, back to the text. But where should I look for the answer? Well, this one looks fairly straightforward. If you leave ice cream on the counter, it melts. So maybe this question is about temperatures. Now, normally I would scan the diagram for words related to temperature. Scanning is when you look for keywords and specific pieces of information in the text. But I already know that the heading for the first policy says food temperature. Therefore, A is the correct answer. Okay, now let's look at the second section of questions. Remember that in reading part 2, the final 3 questions will always be about the text as a whole, including both the diagram and the email. Here's an example from this part. Why is Dave writing to Jennifer? To complain about a policy violation? To make some helpful suggestions? To suggest a new policy be added? To apologize for making a mistake? Okay, why don't we do a bit more scanning? This time, I'll scan the email for reasons why Dave is writing to Jennifer. Okay, Dave says he'd like to offer a few suggestions in the first paragraph. He repeats this again in the second paragraph. He also thanks Jennifer at the beginning and end of the message. Therefore, he's probably not complaining. He doesn't seem to be apologizing either. And there's no indication that he's suggesting a new policy be added. He's simply advising that the present policies be emphasized more. Therefore, B, to make some helpful suggestions, is the correct answer. In this video, we discussed a number of strategies that can prove very useful for reading part 2. Regardless of the topic of this part, there are some things that will always be the same. The time will be 9 minutes, you'll have 8 questions to answer, and the text will take the form of a diagram and a corresponding email. And remember that skimming and scanning can help you efficiently answer each question within the time limit. In the next video, we'll discuss some specific strategies for reading part 3, reading for information. In the previous video, we discussed some special strategies for reading part 2. In this video, we're going to talk about some strategies that will help you in part 3 of the reading test. In reading part 3, reading for information, there will always be 4 paragraphs of informational text. Each question in this part requires you to read a statement and then decide in which paragraph, A, B, C, or D, that information can be found. But sometimes the information isn't found anywhere in the passage, and you'll have to indicate that by selecting E, which means the answer could not be found in any of the paragraphs. Therefore, it's really important to have a good idea what each paragraph does and doesn't discuss. And another thing, test takers often find reading parts 3 and 4 more challenging than parts 1 and 2. Mostly because these later parts tend to contain a lot of difficult vocabulary. Do you remember the 3 types of questions on the reading test? General meaning, specific information, and inference questions. Well, the higher level vocabulary often makes these questions more difficult. Specific information questions are especially challenging in reading parts 3 and 4, as they may depend on your understanding of a particular word. General meaning and inference questions draw on your overall understanding of a text, and so, if you read carefully, they shouldn't be quite as hard. Okay, so where should you begin in reading part 3? First, you should quickly preview all the text. Here's an example to show you what I mean. There will always be a timer like this at the top of the screen. So I've got 10 minutes for this part. And how about the number of questions? Notice that I've got 9 questions here, and they're all in the same format. So I've got a total of 10 minutes for 9 questions. But if I spend just over a minute on each question, that doesn't leave me much time to actually read the passage. That's okay. I briefly mentioned the concepts of skimming and scanning in a previous video. Now I'm going to show you how useful these both can be. First, let's talk about skimming. When you skim a passage of text, you read over it very quickly, keeping an eye out for the main ideas. It's unlikely that you'll have enough time to thoroughly read every line of text, as well as answer the questions. Skimming will help you use your time more efficiently. By looking and